Hey everybody, Dr. Rob Silverman here. I'm excited to have the opportunity to talk with a good friend and esteemed colleague, one of the smartest guys you're ever going to meet, and talking about functional medicine. I got my buddy here, my compadre, Dr. Lauren Marks. How are you?
Okay, Rob, great to be here and looking forward to the conversation.
Yep, that's exactly what I want to have. I want to have a conversation. So many people have asked us questions about the gut to brain axis and all that other things. But, I want to let everybody know who you are. You've got this litany of things to share. So I'm going to try and make it in a real epigrammatic fashion. First off, you've got some experience. You've got 37 years of private practice. So I guess you've seen a few people with a few conditions along the way.
Yeah, just a little.
Just a little. You're located in a great spot. We can eat. And when things get a little bit more back to normal, you're located right at 57th Street, right in Midtown Manhattan. You're a board certified clinical nutritionist. You're also a founder of a technique, IAT, Integrative Assessment Technique. Tell people a little bit about that if you like. You truly specialize in alternative approaches to mental health and gut. And your really secret sauce, your true specialty is SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, which we've had countless conversations on, and you have been coined, and you've allowed me to coin the saying that you think SIBO is the leaky gut of like when I went to school 20, 25 years ago. These guys coming and talking about SIBO, and that's kind of like we wanted to get you to come on in, talk about the gut to brain axis, the chicken and the egg. So what's this thing called the gut to brain axis?
All right. Well, clearly, in the functional medicine world, we're always looking at root cause resolution and trying to define the etiologies of various illnesses rather than a symptomatic approach. Given that, it makes no wonder that if we're going to look at the gut-brain axis, that there are numerous axes in the body. And as time and science elucidates, what we're finding is that these axes all have either a minor or a major implication from the gut and thereof, right? So, but just as you have pointed out in some of your previous presentations, like there's a gut to lung axis, and we talked the gut to brain axis. It's actually an endless array of axes. While it all started us looking at negative feedback loops and things like that between the pituitary and the thyroid, and that was the early understanding of axes. And then as time went on, more and more got an understanding of the gut microbiota and its relationship to all of the physiology of the body. But the reason why I wanted to talk a little bit about the gut-brain axis as it relates to mood, behavior, and mental health is because we got to a point in which all of the research that functional medicine doctors are looking at is like, go to the gut, go to the gut. And unquestionably, this is a locus that should be investigated, that should be expounded upon. And over time, I think that what we already know is amazing. What we're going to know in the future is going to be mind-blowing. But we can't put the laser on to a totality of looking at everything coming from the gut and losing sight that there are other places that are influencing the gut. So when we talk about that bidirectional system of gut to brain, we're also talking about brain to gut. So if we move too far to the left or too far to the right, I think we skew the larger understanding of the gut-brain axis. So when I say the chicken or the egg, it's like, if we just keep looking at the gut and then we define it in whatever parameters you're going to, we still have to say, what if the brain is the primary in a certain circumstance? And it's not the gut primary, but then the negatives from the mental health. Look, the stress that people are under today is outstanding. right? We don't have to go through all the reasons why. People were stressed out before the pandemic. They'll be stressed out after the pandemic. People find a way to be stressed, right? But given that understanding, we have to look at the brain, how people perceive stress, and the neurotransmission imbalances that transpire as a result of it.
Interesting, interesting. So, as we both have said, the gut is the epicenter of your health, but it's true. When you think about it, everything communicating with gut is bidirectional. So it's really hard, or at least the doctor shouldn't just focus on the gut and forget the fact that it may be the secondary thing that's attacked. Like you said, whatever you do to your brain, you do to your gut. Whatever you do to your lung, you may do to your gut. So if we're in that mantra of root cause resolution, we want to find the start of the bidirectionality, which really differs our approach than many other allopathic practitioners, because as great as they are, they're looking more at the symptomology. They're not looking into the system and the start of which system has adversely be affected. So I'm not going to ask you the question, which came first, the chicken or the egg, because we don't really have an answer. But
no, but the whole point is that you need to look at both systems. You know,
right.
We need to pull back and broaden the perspective.
So let's talk about a couple of culprits and faults in the gut to brain axis. Give everybody 5 faults that you think, five causes, 5 things that damage it.
That damage the gut brain axis? Or
sure.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, listen, if we're going to go to the gut, we know that alterations in the microbiota are, which is this massive amount of hundreds of trillions of cells that live within a bacterium, even though there are viruses and parasites and all types of microbes that live within the gut. Clearly, we know that when there are states of dysbiosis or imbalances within this gut microbiome, that we have a signaling problem in which the vagus nerve is picking up these aberrant impulses. It's picking up all the inflammation as a result of it. It's sending it through the vagus nerve and it's signaling the brain, and it's saying, hey, you've got inflammation in the gut, you got inflammation in the brain. So we have to damper that response. That's one way of taking a look at an aspect of the gut. The other thing is we have people who have developed leaky gut, a hyperpermeability of the intestine, right? Now, sometimes that's coming about from a state of dysbiosis where the microbiome is out of balance. Sometimes it's because people are eating the wrong food. And and they're chronically inflamed from eating the wrong foods. They're irritating the lining of their gut. Eventually, there's a barrier breach or a breakdown that's transpiring from this chronic ingestion of the wrong foods for the organism. And now these spaces between the junctions in the gut are allowing things that should normally not transpire and get into your systemic circulation are now there. The body then sees toxins, it sees bacteria, viruses, fungi, anything aberrant to it that is now passed through the gut, got into the bloodstream, and the systemic circulation in your physiology goes like, hey, what are you doing here? You're a foreigner. You don't belong here. You're not digested. You're a toxin. And so now the immune system is going to mount an attack, and it goes on and on. So those are some of the ways that we could look at it from the bottom up, let's call it. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, the perceived stress that people undergo on a day-to-day basis, and clearly some of us have more tolerances than others for the degree of stress that we're living. And as a result of it, it alters the function of our brain, our happiness, our cognitive functions. It goes on and on, right? So what I was able to do when I was studying so much about brain health was I was looking at neurotransmission, because clearly in the modern theorem of understanding mental health and mood and behavior, neurotransmission is running the show. And there are various neurotransmitters that are controlling the way we feel, the way we act, the way our happiness, our unhappiness, and so forth. Clearly, it's not all serotonin because there's various neurotransmitters. They're all interacting with one another. But there are things, then you have to go back from there and you say, okay, so if we take the premise that neurotransmission can be aberrant, then we have to ask the question, what's altering it and what is the site in which we can target in order to balance it, right? So what's really interesting is that in the earlier days in psychiatry, the understanding of neurotransmission was more concentration, meaning the thought was like, hey, if you have low serotonin, how can we get more of that into this person, give them more of it in order to alleviate those symptoms and improve the feelings and the mental health of that person. But as science and time and molecular biology has moved forward, we now know that the site of neurotransmission is really the key. And when they came out with the medications that are SSRIs, which are selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, the terminology is exactly descriptive of the process. Whether you like using those types of medicines or not is not the conversation here. The conversation is understanding the site of neurotransmission and being able to alter it in an appropriate way. So when somebody says, oh, just take a whole bunch of tryptophan and that'll give you the precursor to making more serotonin, while some people can feel better from that, that's not the site of activation, right? It's you have to be able to slow down or degrade the enzyme at the site of neurotransmission in order to allow the neurotransmitter to stick around longer to do its due diligence at its active site of metabolism.
Interesting. So people don't realize the communication between the gut and brain axis. Vagus nerve is your nerve. There's neurochemicals. You spoke about the neurotransmitters. There's hormones. There's a lot of communications. So somebody says, you know what? I like what you say, Dr. Marks. I want to have a good, healthy weekend. Give me 5 things I should do this weekend to improve my brain and gut communication. 5 lifestyle changes.
5 lifestyle changes. Okay, so when we're gonna take that aerial view, I think it's important to not leave out fundamentals. Okay, so what are fundamentals? We need to sleep enough. Neurotransmission is grossly affected by the ability to sleep. Now, instead of looking at depression and serotonin, let's flip the coin and on the other side of it and say, what about people who are anxious? If you ask me what is the number one cause of why people have difficulty sleeping, it's because they suffer from various states of anxiety. So anxiety, if you don't find a way to quell that, they're not going to sleep well in there, or they take a long time to fall asleep, or they wake up frequently. That's another whole story. But point being is sleep is critical, right? If we're going to stay on the aerial view and not keep going down a rabbit hole. Sleep is critical. Got to work on it. The key is acknowledge if that's one of your problems, go after it. Don't put it on the sidelines and think that other things are going to get better if you don't fix that, because it's a fundamental. 2 is you want to work on your gut, right? By working on your diet. So if you're not eating healthy, which is defined differently by different people, but let's just say, let's get rid of a standard American diet, an SAD, and let's start eating whole foods, right? Buy as much organic foods as you possibly can or can afford. Eat much more vegetables and salads, fresh foods, good quality proteins, things of that nature. Increase your water intake. These are fundamentals, right? So let's go there first because they matter. Everybody wants the quick fix, give me the one pill. But if we're talking about fundamentals and you remove fundamentals, that's why you go, I tried this, I tried this, I tried this. It doesn't work, it doesn't work. Give me the meds, all right? So those are some of the fundamentals I want to go after. The next thing is we have to acknowledge that we live in a sea of toxins. And detoxification is absolutely a critical part of your wellness. So if you haven't done it before or you're suffering from an illness, you should strongly consider working with a knowledgeable functional medicine or nutrition-oriented person who knows how to address these and knows the parameters to look at in you, that it's safe, that it's effective, that it's the right program, that you're using the right quality ingredients. These things are very important too. And don't forget, again, going to the word fundamentals for the third time, don't forget that as much as we would like to go and do a lot of these fancier diagnostic tests that are out there in the functional world, I'm a big proponent of making sure that you have really good blood chemistry evaluated first. So when you get a chance to look at that, there are ways of looking at nutrient imbalances and your physiology, and not just having a complete blood count like a CBC, make sure you don't have an anemia that your doctor's going to check on you, a comprehensive metabolic panel. Every physician in the world is going to run those two things as part of your physical, depending on your age. And maybe you'll get you get a lipid panel to make sure your cholesterol isn't off the charts or giving you problems. And if you're lucky, you get a vitamin D, these days. And then other than listening to the complaints, the average physician is telling the patient, if everything comes back within reason, that you're good, I'll see you next year. And the problem with that is that it is not that there's intent of harm being done, but the knowledge that we have now is that there are so many more markers that we should be looking at in order to protect people's health. And if there's this many that should be looked at, excluding the issues with money and insurance companies and all that, but if there's this many and you measure this many and then you tell someone that they're good, it's a full sense of security. So fundamentals, good blood chemistry, detoxification, good sleep, good diet, and exercise. Those things. And neurotransmission is profoundly affected by exercise. Profoundly, right? If you feel off in your mental health, if you feel stressed and you go and you take a run or you go to the gym or just even do some push-ups, sit-ups, whatever your capacity is given your level of health, you will absolutely feel the difference within 30 to 60 minutes of doing it. You're changing your brain by changing your lifestyle habits.
Absolutely. Lifestyle is the first thing they can do, and they're easy implementable steps that they can start right now. It's not like going out and buying a house, buying a car, sometimes even giving them a whole diet with a large number of foods that they need to change. So sleep is easy. We have some questions, so we're going to take them one at a time. So people ask about sleep. Well, how much is good sleep? How long?
Okay, so I feel that 7 to 8 hours is appropriate. I realize that different people have different lifestyles, but that doesn't preclude your physiologic requirements. So some people say, hey, you know, I can sleep 6 hours and I'm flying. And I get that there are variances within humans and that some people do better with more and some do less. But overall, if you don't just use the symptoms of do I feel tired and fatigued during the day or not as a measure of how much sleep you're getting, that's not the greatest way to do it. You want to know that you're getting into the appropriate levels of sleep. So there are things like, you know, personal units, right? Like on your telephone now that you can use. You can buy what's called an Aura ring, and you can see whether you're getting into REM sleep, and you can see how long. So these are personal metrics that can let you know whether or not you are going through the right phases of sleeping, that you're in there. And, you know, look, the more stress that people are on, they tend to drink more alcohol, as an example. The more alcohol you drink, you know, I'm not talking about a glass of red wine, but people who are really hitting it, and you're altering neurotransmission and your sleep cycles by doing that. And if you had a personal metric, like something like the Aura ring or some of these other ones, you would be able to actually track that and see it.
Excellent. Yeah, the Aura ring's great. They got the Whoop and all that. Sleep's really important. 7 to 8 hours, I concur. You talked a little bit about the standard American diet, so I'm going to extrapolate. Little too much sugar, a little too much processed food, maybe too many artificial sweeteners, and too many toxins. I mean, America, 80% of the antibiotics that we're exposed to is in our food. It's 29 million pounds of antibiotics in our food. It's crazy. So it's not what you eat, it's what your food has eaten or been exposed to at that point. And that's why you talked about organic food, chemical-free, antibiotic-free. It shouldn't have to have that on the label. It should be.
Of course not. But look where we are. But
yeah, I mean that's a whole
other conversation. But the bottom line is, I think the takeaway for the audience is, like, when people say, why should I buy organic meats and chicken and fish and eggs and things? For the simple fact, if you just even limit it to the amount of antibiotics that are fed animals and the secondary intake of them. And then think about, if you have the knowledge, you'd realize how those secondary antibiotics are affecting your gut microbiome because they're affected by your intake. So do it.
Yeah, figure it out. You know, it's really funny. I had somebody come on, and his whole thing was how an egg is so healthy, and he cracked an egg, a regular, you know, the white egg that you would get in a normal shopping facility, and he cracked an organic egg, and you saw the difference in the color of the yolk and all the nutrients in the yolk. That was untethered.
And it just leads right back to the conversation and the statement that has been used over and over again, which is, let food be your medicine, not medicine be your, you know, and it's true, right? So you spend a little more if you have it, if you can, and dozen eggs that are organic, and not only organic, but in the egg world, you should be buying pastured eggs, right? So, and so what they're actually feeding these chickens, do you really want to eat GMO corn? And because we just don't know what these things are, have the long-term impact on our physiology. We don't know it. They're doing it because of it's cheap and it makes for volumes of food. But anyway, let's move on from that and just pick up where we were discussing about neurotransmission, because we were talking about the gut-brain axis, and I think it's really important that, since my initial point was don't only look at the gut and let's look at the brain, let's take a little bit of a look at things that can be assessed, right, so that we can give our audience something. So there is a process in the body called methylation. And a lot of people have heard of it and a lot of people have not, right? So methyl is 1 carbon and 3 hydrogens. It's CH3. And the addition of a methyl group to a a chemical process in the body is the process of methylation. Everybody methylates. There's no such thing as a human being without that process occurring, one. Two is there's various aspects to methylation. Like, because what, if anybody has heard of it, the question is, what is it responsible for? Well, it's responsible in part for detoxification and detoxification of heavy metals. It's responsible for an expression of it is methylation. Is cardiovascular health. When you run a blood chemistry, there's a marker called homocysteine. And when you're looking at homocysteine on the blood, you are directly looking at a cardiovascular expression of methylation. Right? And then there is neurotransmission that is responsible in part, that is coming from a methylation process, which we can dig in a little bit on. And DNA repair is responsible. So it's part and parcel with human physiology. And the question becomes, what happens if there's aberrations within the methylation cycle, process, what have you, right? So it can be profound in some and less in others. But let's start with understanding that in the methylation process, everybody uses a synonymous terminology. When you bring up this statement and say methylation, everybody goes MTHFR. Okay, so we need to include it, but we need to broaden an understanding. MTHFR is a gene that encodes for a protein that makes an enzyme that is responsible for folate. People know it as folic acid, but folic acid is synthetic. Folates are the real thing. So MTHFR stands for methylene tetrahydrofolate reductase. So it's that enzyme. And we're looking at what is the enzyme activity on an individual. So in order to know that, you do have to do a gene test. Now, you can do it through the blood, you can do it through the saliva, you can, there's different ways of checking it, but it's a genetic test. But again, the point being is that people are making this synonymous association only between MTHFR, right, and methylation. So the reason why that happened to begin with is because there are over 20 different genes that are responsible for methylation in the body. The reason MTHFR gets so much attention is because it's the largest molecular weight gene in the whole pool of them. Or as Dr. Jeffrey Bland, our mentor, calls the collectiveness of methylation, he calls it the methylome, which I love. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. So the methylome, right, is speaking of all the different genes that are responsible for this process. So here's the key. If you looked at MTHFR as a single gene, and you see that people have what's called SNPs, or single nucleotide polymorphisms, also known as mutations on genes, or variances, depending on your vernacular. People say, oh, I have an MTHFR. Yeah, everyone has an MTHFR. The key is, do you have a SNP on MTHFR first? Do you have a mutation on it? And then which ones do you have, right? So there are two primary ones that the geneticists have figured out. One is C677T, and the other is A1298C. Of those two, you can have various combinations. You can have just one, what's called a risk allele. You can have one alteration or a SNP on the gene of an A1298, or you can have two. So that's called heterozygous or homozygous. Then you can have C677T, heterozygous, homozygous, 1, 2. Or you can have one of each, and that's called compound heterozygous. And at the end of the day, the combinations or what you present with when that test is done is just letting you know the percentage of activity of your ability to metabolize folates. All right, great. Why are folates so important, especially in neurotransmission? Because they're part of a larger cycle in the methylation process that regulates serotonin, that regulates dopamine, and that regulates norepinephrine. So there's your link, all right? And this is why everybody is looking at that. But let's pull back a minute and go, okay, that's still MTHFR. So what about the other? There's more than that, but let's just make it easy and say there's 20. So if there's 20 genes and one of them is MTHFR, what about the other 19? Well, nobody ever told me about the other 19. You know, what are they? And so I can elucidate a lot of them, but that isn't going to help us. What we want to know when we're speaking about neurotransmission and mental health and mood and behavior is we want to be able to get to a place where we understand whether someone is an under-methylator or an over-methylator. And make no mistake about it, just because you have a SNP or a variance on MTHFR does not preclude that you are an under-methylator. That is an inaccurate estimation or understanding of the methylome. What we want to do is we want to be able to define where your net reaction is of all the genes. So the easiest way, Dr. William J. Walsh, who is a PhD and deals only with brain health and disorders, is a nonprofit organization that he has in Illinois. It's called the Walsh Institute for those interested in looking it up. I highly recommend it. His information is phenomenal. He's all about looking at things of that nature. I read his work extensively to help me understand this process. This is where I derived this data from. And he puts it very succinctly when he says, make believe you have a tug of war. And that tug of war on the left side is under-methylating genes. And then we're going to take the other side holding the rope, and we have over-methylating genes. And we have this tug of war, and what we want to ultimately define is who won the tug of war. And you're able to get that answer by doing one of two tests only. And interestingly, it's not running all of these genes and figuring them out. It's a test that you can do with LabCorp only, by the way. And if you do it anywhere else, you're not going to get the answer. That is called whole blood histamine. And whole blood histamine is the defining marker to let you know the global net effect of methylation. So how many are pulling on the left and how many are pulling on the right, and where do we end up at the end? And based upon that information, your therapeutic approach is going to be proper. It's going to be using gene data through looking at chemistry and getting an actual summation of that data. And the reason why that happens is because histamines and methyl are inverse to one another. So in other words, if you have low whole blood histamine, you are an over-methylator. If you have high whole blood histamine, you're an under-methylator. So methyl and histamine are inverse to one another. So this is a standard laboratory that for a reasonable fee, you can define global methylation status. If someone wants to utilize a functional medicine laboratory, then there is a lab that will look at what's called the SAMe to SAW, S-A-H, S-A-M small e, or S-A-H, SAMe to SAW ratio. And that's another way to get an assessment of this. And there's some more data that you can derive from doing a more complex algorithm that they do like that in methylation. But those are the two primary mechanisms that people should be going after. Now, I don't expect patients to do this. How is that? That's being a physical impossibility. So they have to see a practitioner who understands these things and is going to be able to then have those chemistries done. And now let's take that to the next step and roll it into the use of folates in mental health. Because for those that go onto the web and they go looking for Dr. Google and they go looking for all of these practitioners out there who are saying, you know, you should have an MTHFR done and you should be taking methylfolate. I must caution you at avenue, because what happens is if you use high doses of folates, which I see a lot of people do, you run the risk of getting into more trouble than less trouble, right? So some people will argue the fact that there are research papers that are out there, and pretty good ones, where in psychiatry, quite a while ago, they found out that, you know, they try to help people with depressive states using SSRI medication. They apply the type that they think is best for that patient. The patient maybe gets better, maybe doesn't, what have you. But let's say they get better, but there's only a marginal improvement. Or there's a certain percentage, but says, yeah, doc, I feel better, but, you know, I'm still suffering with this and this and this. And they're like, well, then that doctor has a choice of either getting into polypharmacy, where they're starting to give more and more common cocktails of these medications, and that produces a lot of side effect profiles that are pretty nasty. And so at some point, somebody said, wait a minute, let's take a look at the role of folates, neurotransmission, and mental health. And so they did that, and they did find that some people who take an SSRI and then they added folates, which, by the way, in supplement form, which you can get, would be usually methylfolate, right? And you have to, no matter what, whether you're applying it to mental health or you're applying it to another aspect of physiology, I would strongly recommend that you make sure that you are not taking folic acid. And you see on a supplement label, especially on multis and things that the nutrition companies are not professional and up to the standards of what we know in science now. If you see the word folic acid on your supplement, you should not be taking that supplement. It's not a great thing to do. And because the more that you have those MTHFR SNPs and degree that you do, you're going to get into more and more trouble with taking them, because your body can't recognize them. They're foreign. You have an alteration in the gene expression, and it goes down a rabbit hole that is a longer conversation now, but it's just not a good thing. And it actually increasing your risk of other diseases. So it's actually a bad thing to do. So don't assume that just because you're taking a nutrient and you're taking it maybe even in a higher concentration that it can't cause harm. Anything can help and anything can harm, and we have to create a balance within this structure.
So a lot to unpack. I'm not trying to interrupt you. We got a lot to unpack because we got a couple of questions, a couple of wows, a couple of shout outs, really good stuff, really smart, all that. So one thing that I got a whole bunch of questions. Folate, not folic acid.
Correct.
Everybody's got an MTHFR, correct? Gene.
Everybody has the gene or you wouldn't be here.
Right. So the question is the gene aberrant or is it working normally?
Correct.
And if it's working aberrantly, it can be hyper and hypo.
Right. It can,
And
right.
hyper and hypo, what would you do?
No. The gene itself, let's go back. The gene itself, MTHFR, cannot be hyper-hypo. The key is to not rely on MTHFR for global methylation status and giving that call of under or over methylation. You have to do one of those tests that I talked about, which is whole blood or SAMI to SAW, to get global methylation.
Right, because so many practitioners just use the MTHFR as the panacea of health. So there's another step that's much more revealing. Someone has high homocysteine. Last time I looked, doctors don't test homocysteine that much because if you give them methylated B vitamins, it cures the problem. Yay, nay?
Yes. Okay. So elevated homocysteine level, which I said before is an expression of methylation, and it is, and you do want to have it run in your blood, and you should ask your doctor next time you go. If that's not something, you go back and look and see whether it was done. I would probably accurately say that probably 90% of the time it's not done. But needless to say, the point is that is a very important marker for your cardiovascular system. If it's elevated, it's a cardiovascular risk because it has a moderate increase on your ability to produce clots, A, and B, it increases neural inflammation, which is inflammation on the brain, right? So you certainly don't want elevations. The labs have reference ranges, depending on the lab, anywhere from about 10 to 13 and up as high. I routinely screen it on all my patients. What I find is that there are more people that have elevations than less, which is not a good thing. And we want to be able to address it. But there's a caveat to treating homocysteine, and be very careful with what I say this. If a person has mental health issues, and I don't mean about being just a little stressed out, but where you really clinically have anxiety, depression, or any of the other imbalances in the brain, in your brain chemistry, and you treat for the homocysteine using a lot of folates, because folates do an amazing job at helping you lower homocysteine, along with B6, B12, trimethylglycine, and riboflavin. And if you have that compilation, and there's formulas that we use that have them together, so you don't have to take 10 bottles, you will effectively help lower the homocysteine level. However, I just referenced before for you that there are research papers elucidating the benefits of using folates with SSRIs to help depressed patients, right, who have low serotonin levels. But according to Walsh and according to the new science of molecular biology, folates are contraindicated in undermethylators. I'm going to say that again. Folates are contraindicated for undermethylators, and that even if people take them initially and feel better, they run the risk of actually lowering their serotonin levels long term. Now, it's a very, very detailed description, much greater than the capacity to have this conversation right here, and we would need charts and we would need to look at molecular biology. But if anybody wants to know more about that, I would strongly recommend that you look up Dr. William J. Walsh. He has a book out that he wrote that's called Nutrient Power, and it's all about the role of nutrients and epigenetics and the expression of genes on mental health. So very important. And what ends up coming about, if you have a homocysteine that's elevated and you have no mental health issues, I mean, other than normal life stressors, you go ahead and take methylfolate and whatever you need to take in order to lower it, and everything will be good in methyl land. All right? But if you have an elevated homocysteine level and you end up being an undermethylator and you have mental health issues, I understand this is complex conversation. And if you're listening and you're trying to figure all this out, I'm trying to help you understand it, but you need a professional to help you figure this out. Please don't pull your hair out and go, well, I don't know, which one should I take? Should I not? That's why you need a professional to help you. I spend my life reading and researching and treating people in order to define the correct parameters for people so that they are not put into harm's way. But the takeaway on this is be careful with folates. They can be amazing. They are a methylating supporting nutrient par none, but you have to know when, where, who, and how to apply them. And everybody in the nutrition world is as guilty as the people not in that world, which is if a little is good, a lot is better. Please be careful with the concentration of certain nutrients like that, right? If you take a very high dose of folates for whatever the rationale is that you're going to do, and you do that long term, remember that there are things called negative feedback loops in your physiology. And when too much is being put in, the body will shut something else down in order to try to protect itself. So a little it may be too little, and too much is no good. And there's always a sweet spot, which is still a range. And so the right chemistries, the right knowledge gets people in the right space.
Excellent. Excellent. So, like I said, there's a lot to unpack. A lot of people have these issues. They want to know more. How can they find you? How can they get in touch with you on these topics?
All right. My website is docmarks.com. It's DOCMARKS.com. My office is 212-333-7300. And you can always call my staff and reach out to us. And we'll do our best to attend to your health needs. Yeah. So we have any more time on this, or we got to wrap it up?
We're going to wrap it up. We got a whole bunch of stuff, but we're going to wrap it up. And so what I'll do is anybody who has additional questions, I'll funnel them over you and you'll answer them.
That would be fine. I just wanted to throw in there something that we got very involved in this conversation, is that there are two minerals that are really, really important that I didn't want to walk away without sharing with you. That when we talk about mental health, so we're talking about the gut brain, and but when it's the brain, how can we make it better? So we want to find out that methylation scenario. The other thing we want to do is we want to make sure that your zinc and copper statuses are really on point. And you'd have to run a serum copper, what's called a ceruloplasmin, and a plasma zinc. And it's very important that zinc dominates over copper, not the other way around. A lot of people have these problems, especially when it comes to anxiety disorders, of which there are so many. It's ridiculous. And people really suffer from that. And it's one of the places that you should go first to see if that is what's influencing it. So if copper is above the reference range and it's dominating above the zinc and elevated, so that we have both we have a copper dominance when we shouldn't, and we have high levels, the neurotransmitter dopamine in the presence of high copper will convert to norepinephrine, and that will drive anxiety. And it's just such a simple thing to define, and what a profound thing you can do to help people once you get it under control. And, there are other things, but the beauty in the functional medicine world of all these things is instead of just saying, wrap up with this, okay, I have depression, I have anxiety. The key is we need to look at things like zinc, like copper, like methylation, toxicity. How is your gut functioning? And collectively, if we look at these parameters, we have a really good opportunity to alter the expression of your physiology and help you be a more sound and healthy being.
Excellent, excellent. I really appreciate your time sharing with the followers. We're in both our platforms. Hopefully people got a lot of information. They'll digest it. They'll reach out if they have any questions. Of course, we're going to have you back on because we left a lot on the table there. And, you know, leftovers can be reheated and we got to work on that. And, you know, I'm sure we'll chit chat and do all that we do every day, all day, talking about some good stuff. I got Dr. Lauren Marks here. I'm Dr. Rob Silverman. Always yours in health.
Thank you.